Hello, I'm Dr. Kim Williams, Rush University Cardiology, and this is another episode of Awesome Vegans.
Hello, everybody. What a treat. We have Dr. Kim Williams in the house. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so would you mind if I sang your praises?
Okay.
He has quite the resume, and I want everyone to know just who we're talking to. So you are a trustee and fellow and past president of the American College of Cardiology. You're board certified in internal medicine, cardiovascular diseases, nuclear medicine. Oh yeah, we'll get into that. Nuclear cardiology, did not know there was such a thing. Cardiovascular computed tomography. You have served on the faculty of the Pritzker School of Medicine, the Wayne State University School of Medicine, and the Rush University Medical Center, where we are right now, where you are the chief head of the Cardiology Department. I also want to add in that you have been past president of the American Society of Nuclear Cardiology, chairman of the Coalition of Cardiovascular Organizations, and among other things, chairman of the board of the Association of Black Cardiologists.
Okay.
Needless to say, I think we can say we have an expert in the house. So I would like to ask you, since you know so much about cardiovascular health, if we were to take a snapshot of the U.S. today, what would the average American look like from a cardiovascular standpoint?
It would look like 3%.
What does that mean?
So the American Heart Association a few years ago put out the Life Simple 7, and that's where everybody should know their blood sugar and whether or not they're diabetic and have it under control. Everybody should know their blood pressure and have a blood pressure less than 120.
Okay.
Everyone should have a body mass index less than 25 kilograms per meter squared.
That might not be me.
Not so mean that you're not overweight. Should be exercising on a daily basis. Okay. No cigarette smoking.
Okay.
Know that your cholesterol is controlled with an LDL cholesterol of less than 100. Okay.
I think I got that one.
Easy enough to do.
Okay.
And be on a heart-healthy diet, and which has been defined pretty much as a plant-based diet. If you look at the United States, it's 3%.
3% of the people fit all 7.
Have all 7.
Wow, everybody. I want to know if you have all 7. Hit me up on Facebook if you do. Do you have all 7, doctor?
I do. I have all 7.
I'm not quite sure about the body mass index, but I think I got the others. So I got no smoking, and under 120 for blood pressure, I've got that, no problem.
Yep.
And then 100 for the LDL.
Mm-hmm.
I get them confused, but I think I'm 75. Could that be possible?
Certainly.
Okay. So I've been plant-based for a while now. Okay, so if those are the 7 things we're supposed to have, and only 3% of the United States of Americans have them male, female, the same. Is that accurate? It's the same over the sexes?
This was actually, believe it or not, it's sadder than what you're just saying. This was actually done in young people.
Oh my gosh.
Adolescents and teens. And so we're in trouble coming up.
We are in
men
trouble.
And women, particularly the women with obesity and the men with, particularly African Americans, with hypertension. It's and the funniest part about the Life Simple 7, it's all lifestyle. That is, if a person was doing the exercise well and doing the diet optimally, the others would disappear.
With no meds.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Well, so now how does this compare to, or maybe I should ask you more openly, what are the cardiovascular guidelines? I think there are guidelines set by the cardiovascular community. Is that not right?
So the American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association got together first back in the early 80s to try to talk about putting in pacemakers and but even before that,
to everyone.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
to 97% of the population.
Oh no. This was back the whole idea. Who needs a pacemaker? We have this new technology. It's not new anymore. And so, who should get it? Who is it going to help the most? You put together all the science, and then you make a guideline document.
Yes.
Okay. So since then, we've done everything: heart failure, heart attack, sudden cardiac death, and we now are doing prevention guidelines and with good frequency. And I've been fortunate to participate with 2 of them, 2 of the last 3. That was hypertension and primary prevention. And so there are guidelines, but I don't know that you wanted me to go through all of them because it's a massive, every disease state has a guideline. So
maybe
you're asking about prevention, maybe? Cholesterol?
Well, what are the big biomarkers that then lead to cardiac disease? You probably have a couple that stand out.
Okay, so if you look at so I'm still segueing from your guideline question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, that would be...
I'm not a doctor.
Okay.
Has this been made clear yet?
No. So that would be our prevention guideline. It came out 1 month ago, and there are several sections. It talks about smoking cessation, dealing with obesity, diet, exercise, drugs if you have to, and the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of those. It talks about nutrition, and that was the portion of it that I was fortunate to have a bigger impact on. And it went through being a little over a year after our hypertension guidelines. Do we really believe those guidelines were correct? What should be the take-home points? All of that is actually in the guideline. And so when you say what you're asking specifically, I think, is about the lipid section, the cholesterol section.
And the nutrition section. I'm curious what the nutrition section guidelines are for cardiovascular health.
Okay, but I promise to answer your questions one at a time.
Yes, fair enough. Fair enough.
So which biomarkers? So there was, with the advent of the newest cholesterol guidelines, we did come down on the side of having a little bit more of those advanced lipid tests that had been sort of shunned by the guidelines in the past. That is Lp(a) is one, and as well as lipid particle size. So when do you use those? And the background of that is that all of the research says that all the stuff we learned about cholesterol was pretty much not true. That is, you had the good, the bad, and the ugly. You put those together, and that's the total. The good was the HDL, the bad was the LDL, and the triglyceride was the ugly. Well, if your triglycerides are really high, there are things that you could do. A lot of it's lifestyle, some of it's genetics, and but a lot of it's lifestyle, okay? HDL, we went after that for decades, drug after drug, niacin, torcetrapib, you name it. We tried to improve HDL, improve outcomes. We could improve HDL, we didn't improve outcomes.
Oh, interesting.
And so we've kind of given up on that, particularly after some large series suggested that a really high HDL puts you at more risk for a heart attack.
Oh.
Sort of news that sort of upset everyone after 40 years of telling people the opposite. So what it really boils down to is your LDL represents your biggest risk. And sure, you could refine it a little bit. If you had somebody, who had a borderline one and they really didn't want to go on a statin, or you as the doctor didn't really want to put them on a drug, and you're looking for something to bail you out or to support your point of view or refute it, then you could do these two other biomarkers. That would be the Lp(a), lipoprotein A, which tends to be genetic, and be a risk factor that you should know about in these borderline cases, as well as the LDL particle size, because a dense LDL fraction is much more dangerous than the fluffy LDL in terms of going into arteries. But the last part of your biomarker question is we don't give up on inflammation, and that is the high sensitivity C-reactive protein from 15 years ago when it became popular. We still do that one when there are borderline cases as well. But if you don't have a borderline case, the biomarkers that you really want to know what your LDL is. And that can go into a risk calculator from the American College of Cardiology, American Heart Association. Everybody can get this app on your phone. You say risk calculator, it'll come up, and it's a great party tool. Well, the kind of parties that I go to.
The parties that you go to.
Where you ask all your friends what their LDL, blood pressure, diabetes, everything, and you tell them you've got a 10.5% risk of having a heart attack, stroke, or death in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I bet you make friends easy. Yeah.
So it's not so much fun. But sometimes it really does give people insight. What we really don't use it at parties. What we do is we go to churches and community groups and the Polish Center and African American community, and we did Veggie Fest a couple of times. We go in with our what we call the Heart Program, helping everyone assess risk today.
Oh, great!
Spells heart.
Yes.
And we do the little finger stick for the LDL cholesterol and the hemoglobin A1C to see if they're diabetic or pre-diabetic. We do their blood pressure. And take a history, you're a smoker, you're African American, you're female. You put all of those factors in the little app on the phone and tell them the number. And if it's between 5 and 7.5%, they ought to have a conversation about changing things. If it's a 7.5% or 7.5% or greater, they really ought to be seeing their doctor about either if they can't change the lifestyle, medication. If they can change the lifestyle, do it, and then come back and do it again and try to make it better.
So tell me the name of that app again, because actually my boyfriend wants this.
Yeah, good. It's ACC-AHA.
ACC
Risk Calculator.
ACC-AHA.
American Heart Association.
Risk Calculator. Okay, are you all getting that? You should be getting that right now, that app, Risk Calculator. Okay, so if you say to people, so it's interesting, you go really to cultural destinations. Veggie Fest isn't a cultural destination, but you're going to the Polish Center, you said. I'm assuming because they eat lots of meat, but we'll get to that in a second.
High cardiovascular risk.
But basically, eating and lifestyle is cultural.
Yeah.
As well as habitual and other things. So let's get to nutrition then. What if you go to the Polish Center or the African American Center and you come up with a lot of people with numbers that are dangerous,
right?
Beyond telling them your number's dangerous and it looks bad for you, what else can you tell them about changing their lifestyle?
So it's really difficult.
Yes.
I've got so much to say on this, okay? But let me start with the idea that we really do struggle trying to change particular populations. That is, when you go and you tell somebody that you have heart disease now, this bypass surgery or the stent or whatever it is that we're doing is because of the way you ate, and we need you to change it. You're basically attacking their family, you're attacking their parenting.
What they know.
You're attacking their community, and particularly in African Americans, you're attacking the church.
Why the church?
The church food. So you typically fried chicken and the like.
Okay.
And so culture is so important. That you've heard that old saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
I hadn't heard that. Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
And I can tell you that's a high-fat breakfast.
Okay. Right. Yes. Okay.
So we really do have to try to change things. And how do you do it? You have to meet people where they are. That's a famous Dean Ornish kind of aphorism. And you try to get them to make some improvements. And yes, if you have the type of personality, like I will read one study that says you shouldn't eat egg yolks, and boom, I'll turn it off, and I never miss it, okay? Not everybody has that kind of, I'm over 60 African-American male, I know I will get cardiovascular disease if I do anything wrong.
Right.
Not everybody's thinking about that.
Yes.
But those of us who do can actually change behavior pretty quickly. And so changing behavior is not easy. Okay?
Yes.
So what can we do? A lot of education. And this past Lent, as you know, Lent is over yesterday. Okay, and even though I grew up in the African American church in Southside Chicago, I had no idea that African American churches now tend to celebrate Lent by giving up something.
That's great.
And so we went into a church on the south side of Chicago, and we actually got people to give up animal products for Lent.
Both, so not just meat, but meat and dairy.
We fed them vegan food.
Awesome. I want to know what their numbers were like after that. I'm sorry, I just want everyone to be able to see Dr. Head on.
So those numbers will hopefully come out in the next week, and we'll hopefully be pleasantly surprised that people lost the weight to what we expect with changing from American or African American diet to a whole food plant-based diet is a decrease in the LDL cholesterol, triglycerides, the blood pressure, the weight. Their energy levels should be better, and we'll see. It's a hypothesis. We had at least 90% compliance. We had 90% compliance with the return for blood tests. So
that's wonderful. So really a large portion of the community participated and gave you their blood samples. So will we have access to this kind of information? Because I'm specifically thinking of Gwenna Hunter, who's watching. I know that Vegans of LA would like to have that information.
Oh, gosh. So I'm happy to speak with anyone about reproducing it. Wouldn't it be nice if we actually had the results first?
Right, but, yes, of course. Okay, but I'll be able to get the results and share them with people?
I'm sure that the whole idea of this was to make sure that we're publishing it, that it becomes a model for other folks to do, a model for us to move on with further studies, and I know the church is very interested in they're saying, okay, we did it. What's next?
Yes, right. So, what can you give us? Okay, so when you say that you fed people vegan food, give me some examples. Like, what did you serve up at church that people liked and were willing to eat and could incorporate easily into their lives?
So I have a fair amount of personal experience with vegan delivery. and one of them
okay.
It was actually really good and really reliable, and I was never disappointed, and very quick, where you take that package out of the freezer and you pull back the lid and an inch, and you put it in the microwave. I know I'm supposed to take the stuff off, but I never do. I just stick it in the microwave.
Busy doctor here, doesn't have time for that stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it was actually always very good. So I thought I would take a chance on, taking a culture like I said, that's very difficult to change the diet and do that intervention. And, there are people who were, they were all pleasantly surprised with it. There were a couple people that had difficulty with it. A couple people didn't want to continue, and you understand that, but
not the majority.
90%. Oh gosh, we got 90% now. Once I have all of the, so we asked them, okay, we're going to do completely plant-based diet, but if you cheat, don't think of it as cheating. Just think of it as a project. Write it down. That's all I'm asking. So write it down. So when I get those questionnaires, my data manager had reviewed some of it, and she said pretty much it was never cheated, never cheated, never cheated.
Really?
Well, so I'm sure there'll be some exceptions,
yes.
but that is probably because the food was really good.
Good, yeah.
So.
And did you order from restaurants, or did you make it?
Vegan delivery services, and I always hate to come out with one company over another.
But there are a bunch in Chicago, as there are now.
This was not Chicago. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know of one in Chicago.
Oh, it's actually. I'm sorry. I thought.
One in Chicago.
Well, maybe I misunderstood you. No, maybe I misunderstood you. I thought you were saying vegan delivery services, as in any general delivery.
To their homes.
To their homes. Okay.
Yes.
I'm not aware of that program, actually.
No. It's just if you go online and you look for vegan delivery services. So I'm blanking on where the third one is, but since I'm not saying their name anyway, it won't matter. I can't. They might be in Cleveland, maybe. One of them is in New York, and the one that we chose is in Los Angeles.
Okay, and they did it in Chicago for you.
They delivered FedEx frozen food.
That is fantastic.
2 weeks at a time.
That is fantastic.
I mean, obviously you have to be able to take 42 meals in your freezer, but people figured that part out.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about every night you would just call up and order from a different vegan restaurant, and then you had vegan delivery service from that restaurant. You had a company vegan delivery service.
The nice part about it is that they set the menu, and it's a variety of things. When I just I personally use them. I've used several of them, but this is my favorite. When I grab some of them, they're 350 calories, and if I'm playing a lot of tennis, I have to eat 4 or 5 of those meals. But for those people in that project, they were doing fine with 3 meals a day, and sometimes it would be 1,500 calories, but probably not. It's probably most of the time it would be 1,100 or something like that.
That's really good.
That was really good.
Wow, so they've had dramatic change, I would think, in their lives.
We'll find out.
Oh, so very exciting.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, you said in their lives. That is true.
Yeah.
That we've gotten the feedback that people feel like this has changed their life completely.
I would think that they feel so much better.
Jury's still out because the labs are actually, since it's not a competition, I think don't mind saying the company that did it. It was Boston Heart Labs. They actually do advanced lipid testing and all that stuff, and they get kudos because they decided that it was in the interest of science and the betterment of mankind to do them all for free.
Wow. So shout out to them.
Exactly. So I really appreciate their contribution to African American health, because we have the healthcare disparities that have been present for decades, and we haven't improved as much as the other segments of the population. And when an African American person, saying this to the audience, an African American person doesn't understand that they have hypertension, or they understand it, which they actually do in high numbers, but don't have it controlled or treated or controlled, and ends up in kidney failure. Immediately, you could be 30 years old, go on dialysis, and immediately you qualify for Medicare. Now, who's paying the Medicare taxes?
We all are.
So this is not an African American problem. I've been telling people this for decades. It's not an African American problem. It is a financial burden on everyone, and that's why I tend to talk about patriotism and preserving Medicare and as a duty for all of us to quit eating animals and make ourselves healthy.
Okay, so let's get into that. You stole my segue to the end of this conversation, and we're not at the end, folks. But so give me the line. I don't want to steal it from you. Go ahead and say the whole line about patriotism.
Well, so it has a little bit of background, and that was, I guess, because I was a nuclear cardiologist and I had been president of the American Society of Nuclear Cardiology. And nuclear cardiology, about 15 years ago, believe it or not, had gotten to the point, and maybe there was a little overutilization back then. The overutilization was probably fear. If I don't do that stress test on this person when they're asking me to, even though I don't think they have heart disease at all, but if I don't do that test and they had dropped dead, their family's going to sue me. And the most reliable, easy way to get the information was nuclear cardiology. It grew. I mean, I want to say mushroom, but that would be too much of a nuclear joke. And so it really grew very quickly over a couple decades. And next thing you know, it's the number one Medicare expenditure. You know what happens when you get to be number one? You get a bullseye right on your back. And so they started looking at those codes, reevaluating those codes. And so I was suggested as a member of the Medicare Hospital Outpatient Prospective Payment System, HOPS panel, to try and make sure that cardiology didn't take some big hits that were going to hurt cardiology practice.
I see.
And I had some impact as a Medicare advisor, but I think they affected me more than I affected them. Every time I went to that meeting, 3 times a year for 4 years, I was blown away with the intelligence and the dedication of the Medicare folks and their lack of resources and the task before them, which is to try to cover people who are out to get themselves, and you're going to be their safety net. So when they do have the stroke, because they ate animal products and they do have a heart attack and need bypass surgery, you're going to cover it somehow with tax money that's limited.
Yeah, the math doesn't add up, clearly.
Right, so the math doesn't add up, and there was an article came out, a warning that came out from Medicare trustees a few months ago saying that the Medicare Trust Fund will be bankrupt in 2026. Now, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to just sit by and let it happen? Or are we going to actively say, it's my patriotic duty to take zero Medicare money, okay? And do everything I can to be healthy and avoid illnesses. I'm not going to do things that make no sense. You don't do knife fights on a Saturday night in a bar when you're taking Coumadin for blood thinner. There's some things you just don't do.
As only a doctor would say. Only a doctor would come up with that analogy.
Okay.
Yes, you don't do that on a Saturday night. Neither do I, actually.
Okay, good, good.
Well, okay, so what I think you're hitting on a very, very important point, which basically is to say the responsibility is our own, because there may or may not be Medicare. I mean, certainly we hope that there is, but the responsibility for our health has to be our own, and it has to start with us. And in doing so, a healthy us is a healthy America. Sort of, those can be one and the same. So to preserve Medicare is not to overtax it, and to not to overtax it is to not to overtax our own system.
Right. So can I double down on that?
Yeah, double down. This is what this show is about.
It's not just Medicare.
Oh, okay.
It's not just the government. It's not just the country. It's our communities and it's our families. So
it's our planet. I will triple down.
No, that's okay. That's a good point in terms of nutrition, but in terms of health and taking care of ourselves and doing, looking after risk factors, avoiding them, improving our diet, exercise, taking medication. Okay, and I just got out of a huge clinic, and 2 of the patients were related. It was the mother and the daughter. Well, the mother had a stroke in January, and daughter I'd been following for so long, and she really said, how could this happen? And with her mother's permission, I let her know exactly how it happened. That I told her that she needed to change her diet, and she didn't. She needed to exercise, and she didn't. She had indications by those ACCHA guidelines for statins that she didn't want. Okay, so what happens? Sure, she had the stroke, spent the time in a month in rehab, getting home, still needs 24/7. Who's doing the 24/7? Right. So now my patient is struggling because she's taking care of the mother.
Right.
Why? Because that's what we try to do for each other. So you need to take care of your health, everyone, so that you don't affect your family in a negative way. You know, their income, their time, the times that they can enjoy their life. This was a wonderful patient who just loved travel. She can't go anywhere.
Now that's over.
You know, she's until there's more recovery and she gets more help and figures it out. So these are big implications, these illnesses. Not everybody has sudden cardiac death in Harold, Washington. They're done, you know. These are people, and obviously sudden death, I don't want to minimize that.
It's huge and painful, right?
It's huge and painful for everyone who's left. The only person that doesn't hurt is the one who died. But the fact of the matter is that your job,
most
your
people
family,
linger. Most people don't
that's
have
right.
sudden death. Yeah.
Most people, but the other thing is that cardiology has been at the forefront of making things better. With the population getting worse, we've had a decrease in death rate. We haven't stopped the heart attacks, but we know how to manage them so well that people don't die as much anymore.
So this brings me to nutrition. Doctors don't get too much nutritional education when going through medical school. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. The American College of Cardiology, can I just say ACC from now on?
Please, American College of Cardiology, ACC from now on.
Okay, so we actually have a nutrition group. And it's, you know, I like to call them I shouldn't say it publicly, I like to call them the vegan mafia, but it's not that exactly, because there are nutritionists of all varieties. There's Mediterranean, there's even a keto person, you know, and they try to wrestle with the science and to try to improve the understanding of nutrition by physicians, because as you say, it is woefully absent. So what we actually did, Steve DeVries was the lead author on an article that looked specifically at how many physicians got adequate nutrition education. And out of our American College of our ACC membership. And it turns out it was 1% of our practicing cardiologists and 0% of our trainees.
Okay, so now that makes no sense. So I just want to, we are doubling down in this show. That's what we do. We just talked about how it is the responsibility of people to change what they eat and their lifestyle and their exercise so that they can have a healthy life. And you can't not do those things and expect a healthy life. You can't not give doctors nutritional education and then expect them to preach to people about what they should be doing for their health.
So you like doubling down. What's the leading cause of death of cardiologists?
Probably heart disease. I'm just
exactly
guessing.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly right. And so that means that you know how to manage it, you don't know how to prevent it.
Because you don't even know your own health.
Exactly. And so we end up, and I do have friends who have died sudden cardiac death. I have friends who, you know, I guess it's a famous story where I was out to dinner, you know, one late September at an international conference with the president of the American Heart Association, and we had a discussion about the diet because he was eating beef and the other guys were eating seafood and I was eating tofu. And, you know, and then ultimately a couple months later he ends up with a heart attack. And
don't they do their own numbers? I just don't understand this sort of incongruous nature.
Not for physicians. That's a bigger topic, and the physicians are notoriously bad about taking care of their own health, and they work really hard. And
yes,
you know, there's the whole thing about physician wellness and burnout, depression, suicide, divorce. You name it. This is. It used to be military. It was the number one. Now it's physicians.
It's a stressful industry for sure.
So having said that, you can end up with a diet that becomes comfort, where food, this is quoting a friend of mine the other day, food is the not just the comfort, but the refuge and the friendship and the love.
Yes.
That's where they're getting it. And
that's why it's the drug, because it's all of these. It can be a drug.
Exactly. And so we need to change that whole paradigm, that nutrition is supposed to help you live and live longer. And so what am I doing with the patients? The difficult patients, the difficult doctors, the thing that I would like everybody to be able to think about as I started asking them. I ask them a lot of questions, but now I'm asking them rhetorical questions. Don't tell me the answers. You just think about it.
Right.
Number one, when you're making these food choices and whether or not you're going to exercise, your lifestyle choices, number one, how long do you want to live? Number two, how much life do you want to have during that life? Okay. Number three, is there any food that tastes better than your health?
People? Is there anything better than your health? I don't think so.
And number 4, how sick do you want to be? And if people can't wrestle with those 4 questions, then I may not have much success. But if people really want to optimize the answers to those questions, they're basically going to, try to do a whole food, plant-based diet and exercise every day.
I always ask people, do you want to live longer or do you want to die longer? Because people say to me, well, I don't really need to change over to a plant-based diet because we're living longer than we ever have. And I say, well, you're not living longer, you're dying longer because we're just keeping you on meds. Right. But it's not a way to live. I have my own personal 2 cents there. Let's talk a little bit about when we say nutrition and lifestyle. Let's give us exactly what you mean by whole food plant-based diet. I think my viewership knows what we mean, but just who knows where this is going to go on YouTube. So let's give people exactly what you mean by a whole food plant-based diet.
So first of all, there's data, and people will argue with the data.
Yes, and please support it by data. That would be great.
People will argue with the data that if you look at comparisons such as the Adventist Health Study, where you have the 5 different diets, the standard American, the semi-American, the pesco vegetarian, meaning fish, the ovo-lacto vegetarian, which is what they preach from the pulpit, I think, which has eggs and dairy, and then the vegans, okay, which is smaller in number, but it's enough numbers that they're able to compare them in every aspect. Number 1, the vegans are the only group that on average is not overweight, a body mass index less than 25.
I hope I don't skew the numbers.
Okay. Number 2, it's a fraction of the diabetes, a fraction of the hypertension, and about a 30% decrease in cardiovascular mortality, even if they haven't been doing it lifelong. Okay, so then if you look at the outcomes, for women it's a little bit more than 6 years, for men it's almost 10 years.
In terms of longer life
expectancy, if you're doing the plant-based nutrition. So, you can take that data set and say, well, that's good for those people, but what about doctors and nurses? There actually is a nurses' health study and a health professional follow-up, which is mostly doctors. And they really have analyzed it pretty well, that if you're eating more than 14 grams of red meat per day, which is about that much apparently,
okay,
you're putting yourself at risk. If you and guess what the amount of processed red meat you should be able to eat without increasing your melon?
That stuff's just pure cancer, so I don't know.
0.
Oh, 0. Oh, nothing.
The funny thing, the manuscript says high amount of processed red meat, and high is defined as greater than 0. It says it right in the
And that would be, just again for maybe people not watching, processed red meat, we're talking about cold cuts, hot dogs, bacon. Ham.
Sausage.
Exactly. All right, people. So basically what everybody eats every day.
Well, a lot of people do eat hamburgers, and the animal rights people may not like me saying it, but if we were concerned about human health, if everyone would stop eating eggs, which are worse than red meat, and stop eating processed red meat, which is worse than eggs, you would cut the heart attack rate by probably about 20% just by doing that.
Yes, but since I'm one of those animal rights people,
Absolutely.
I'll just say, okay, but today we're talking about cardiovascular health. We're not talking about cancer. We're not talking about asthma. We're not talking about diabetes. I mean, we're so there's, you're talking about all of those.
No, I was talking specifically about cardiovascular mortality. Oh, those are the big 3.
Oh, those are the big 3. Okay,
exactly.
But not asthma and things like that. I understand that dairy has a negative impact on things like asthma, and so.
And cancer.
Yeah.
And
cancer.
In fact, that was one of the really big take-home points. This article that I'm talking about was published in the Journal of American Medical Association in October 1st of 2016. Song was the first author. Again, it's Nurses Health Study and Health Professional Follow-Up. It was talking about people at risk. There are people who are not at risk, and they probably could eat whatever they want. But the people who are at risk, which is most of us, really have to be careful. And you're right, it wasn't just about all-cause mortality or cardiac mortality. It did cancer mortality well. The strangest thing that nobody expected, since processed meat is a World Health Organization Class 1 carcinogen.
Like cigarettes?
You never would have expected eggs to numerically outstrip processed red meat in its association with cancer death.
I love that. I love to learn that because
unbelievable.
I didn't think there was anything worse than bacon, but you're saying it's eggs. Interesting. Well, I saw your talk on this subject, and my thing that I took away from it, as well as the eggs, was that avocados were rich in fiber. I did not know this. I saw this from your chart. And that beef and peanuts have the same amount of protein per 100 grams.
That's exactly
So that
right.
was very fun for me to learn as well.
Right. That's a particularly difficult spot for us in medicine, having dietitians who have variability in their training on this particular issue, and I have to be careful because I've had them try to dress me down. Yes, of course we know that. Why are you saying that? We don't know that. Well, because I won't say
Tell
which
him,
one.
doctor.
I won't say which one, but I was in front of a large state organization. I won't even. I can't. If you could figure it out where it was, if I said the name of the conference, okay.
Okay.
500 dietitians, 3 vegans out of the entire group, and I'm telling them about mortality, and they're asking me about, well, what about your omega-3 levels in the serum? And wait, I'm talking about living and dying. And the usual challenge is that you can't get enough protein on a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet. And so
But that's just flat out wrong.
So I said, okay, all right, so tell me, how do you think they should get, what do you think they should eat to get protein? Oh, like a steak, okay? Where did steak come from? And they look at me like I'm an idiot. And they say, a cow. And I said, and what does a cow eat? Then the light bulbs start going off. And they realize that the largest land mammals on the face of the planet are all vegetarians. And, the barn next to that poor cow is full of horses, and they're all eating hay. And the giraffe in the zoo is up there on the top of. Is he eating squirrel eggs? Squirrels don't have eggs.
No.
He's eating leaves. I mean, it's so funny that there's this idea that plants don't have protein. I don't know where it started. It obviously is false, and everyone knows the data to refute that in their own mind.
So I really want to talk about this. It's hard to say this sentence. We've been doubling down, so I'm sorry if I seem irreverent. It borders on willful ignorance, intentional misinformation. I mean, how can doctors and dietitians not know that plants have protein? Or perhaps better said, how can they keep that information from their patients? I'm sorry, I just don't understand how we could be at this sort of informational void.
Right. So, I don't want to give doctors a pass on this because of what's happening to them, but it's all about the training, right? And who is setting the curriculum in the medical schools. Now, the dietitians, I can't really do that. I don't expect the dietitian to necessarily know the difference between aspirin, Plavix, Brilinta, and Prasugrel. They're all different antiplatelet drugs, but that's not what they're trained in. Okay?
But they are trained in nutrition.
But they are trained in nutrition. So I want to hold them to a higher standard than physicians, and then have them help the physicians, team-based care, put everybody's skill and have them complement each other. That's really what we should be doing, and it's hurting us if the people who should be the experts aren't knowledgeable in this area.
Yes, it's very frustrating because we all have Google. And so to think that because of Google, we could now be more educated than a dietitian who is potentially, not always, potentially giving misinformation or health disadvantageous information.
Well,
it just seems criminal. I don't know.
The science, the surprising aspect to that is that the American Diabetes Association, not always, but generally, I'm in agreement with what they're doing, okay? And in both 2009 and then an update in 2013, they put out their position statement on vegan and vegetarian diets. And they were there, anyone can Google it, and you would see their statement that this is a way of reversing diseases. It actually says that on their website.
So then I'd like to understand the pushback to that information. Why isn't that information more readily available? Why are doctors, institutions, medical schools not forthcoming here?
Well, okay. So I started to say, well, the problem is that they put out a guideline and then they don't make sure that everybody knows it and follows it. And then I realized that our ACC-AHI guidelines, if you look at hypertension, cholesterol management, the things that we fundamentally write these guidelines, synthesize decades of literature and put them into recommendations, put them out at a big meeting. It's a cardiology meeting. So then you come back a year later and you look at who's doing it. Cardiologists are doing it 90%, but we're kidding ourselves. Most of this hypertension and diabetes and cholesterol is seen by primary care, and they're not doing our guidelines at all. So I'm saying that to say that we're just as guilty as they are. You could put together a great position statement that has great evidence behind it, but if you don't have some like marketing campaign or something that gets the word out, and then, hate to say it, but a lot of times you need quality measures, and then you need pay for performance to take those quality measures and turn it into reimbursement or penalties. And then you actually get buy-in to guidelines.
So let me see if I can summarize what you've just said. Are you saying that it's not financially in their best interest to really care that much about this information? Perhaps I've misunderstood. Clarify if I've got that wrong.
Well, let's put it another way.
Okay.
If you really think about the macroeconomic effect of disease entities, if everybody did a whole food plant-based diet, it would put them out of business. Yes. Okay. All right. Put most of us out of business in cardiovascular space as well as the nutritionists. But I don't think anyone is thinking of it that way. Everyone goes into healthcare thinking that they're going to get up every day and go to work and help people. So I wouldn't put any, nefarious, commercial entities, don't even get me started.
Right.
But the individual workers, absolutely, they're going to try to help people, and it's just about a knowledge base. And so, yeah, every time I go to a medical grand rounds, not a cardiology grand rounds, but a medical grand rounds, and I give a lecture on nutrition or management of hypertension from our newest guidelines or prevention guidelines, there's an uptick in following those guidelines. They download them, they read them, and their patient care improves. So we all need marketing strategies.
Interesting.
It's not easy.
And you don't think of a doctor as having a marketing strategy, but I guess, okay, therein lies the issue. But we touched on pushback, but this isn't exactly pushback, what you're telling me. This is sort of like a problem with getting the information out. What about people that you say, okay, my fellow colleagues, whole food, plant-based diet, which we did talk about a little bit, just for those who aren't clear. No meat, no dairy, and not processed vegan foods. We'll get to that question later. Maybe a little bit of processed. We'll get to what's the ratio of, whole foods versus some processed foods. Probably 0 is what you're going to tell me. But okay, we're talking about fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, beans, etc., nuts, seeds. What about people that you recommend those diets to and they say, no, that's wrong? Or what sort of like flat out resistance do you get?
So the typical resistance is the cultural one that I mentioned, that it's just too difficult. I'd be the only one in my family. And, I try to meet them where they are. Okay, bring your family in. We can have a discussion about it. I tend to, the easiest people to change, there's 2 groups that are really easy to change. People with a graduate degree.
Oh, okay.
Why is that? Is it because I give them information, I show them JAMA articles, and they absorb them, and they're used to taking data and turning it into action? The other one is a vegan daughter. Boy, but somebody has a vegan daughter. That really makes a huge difference.
Go, girls.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you about that, though, because I would say doctors all have graduate degrees, and sometimes they're very reticent to take this information.
And the interesting part about it is that I have a lot of success with doctors.
Oh, you do?
So we have 20 plant-based cardiologists here at Rush.
Oh, I'm thrilled to hear that.
So because I gave the grand rounds, they look at the data, and next thing you know, they're very interested in it.
That's wonderful. So that's great to hear.
You can always tell when it happened too, because you saw them a few months ago, and then you see them running down the hall, and they're moving faster, and they're a whole lot thinner. I said, "Did you go plant-based?"
Yeah,
my blood pressure went from 150 to 118, and it's like they're so excited.
Also, I also tell people it's like aging backwards, because you drop about 5 years. It's not just that you drop pounds, but you go back in time because you just have so much more energy. I see that some people are saying they've got questions. So Brendan, just shout out your question and we'll get to it if we can. I'm trying to do interview and read your questions. So please just give it to me, Brendan, if you got it. Okay, so we are kind of wrapping up and coming close to the end. Maybe we could talk about the transition diet. So You know, there's been lots of news about the Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat and other processed foods to varying degrees. We've got some things that aren't very processed at all, like tempeh, which I love, and tofu, which is processed to a little degree, but not very much. And then we've got really processed foods. So, you know, a lot of people, when they're getting out of a meat-based diet or even meat and dairy, so a lot of processed vegan cheeses, they switch over to like for like, and they hop over from the burger to the plant-based burger. So tell me about that kind of transition diet. Do you recommend it? What kind of ratio do you like to see between processed foods and whole food?
So I actually lived it for the longest time just because my problem was LDL cholesterol was high. And so anything that didn't have cholesterol was on the table.
Okay.
And, you know, then you learned a little bit more. And we now know that if you look carefully at the published literature, Alicia Wilk, I've never met her, but she's at the Karolinska, and she published an article talking about the number of, you might have seen this in my talk, the number of things that say you shouldn't eat red meat. And the number had increased over from 1970, when there was like 2 or 3, to 2015, where there were 450.
Yeah.
Okay.
Articles saying don't eat red meat, studies, etc.
And embedded in those studies are several themes. One, and she actually outlined it, all of them. But the major, if I could break it down into just to 4 simple ones, it's cholesterol. It is the presence of saturated fat.
Okay.
And there's some trans fats as well.
Yeah.
There is TMAO, which is a 4-letter word that everyone needs to know. And the last one is heme iron. Okay, so let's start with heme iron.
Okay.
Heme iron is the kind of iron that's so easily absorbed. If you were a vampire, you drank a pint of blood, all that iron would get into your bloodstream and help you go into your bone marrow and help you make new red blood cells and make them really strong and everything. The only problem is that iron is oxidized.
Okay.
Chemically sitting in the heme molecule, oxidized. And when that comes out, it actually upsets plaques. It grows plaques and upsets them. And so creating reactive oxygen species. So there was one study from the NIH and the AARP, of all places, saying that it's heme iron and nitrates and nitrites that are killing all the Americans and causing this mortality. So you put that in one bucket. Don't eat heme iron.
Okay.
Right? So the next one is TMAO.
Okay.
Trimethylamine N oxide. So it's a 4-letter word. Again, please look it up if you haven't seen it. It is a toxic compound that is actually in the fish already. It's like works as antifreeze for the fish. But if you eat sources of choline, which is eggs, meats, cheese, animal products, choline, phosphatidylcholine, those get into your GI system. Okay. And if you have certain bacteria, which are common in people who eat animal products, not so much in vegans, okay, those bacteria will take those substrates and turn it into trimethylamine, which then your liver, at a rate determined by your genetics, will turn that trimethylamine into trimethylamine N oxide. Okay. That compound does everything you wouldn't want in the cardiovascular system. Okay. It actually creates plaque. It makes plaques rupture. It makes the platelets, the sticky things that you try to fight with aspirin when you have heart disease, it makes those platelets clump. Okay. And in fact, if you compare a person with a high TMAO level versus one that doesn't, the one that, if you have a high TMAO level and you're on aspirin, you're no better than a person who has a low TMAO level not taking aspirin. I mean, you're in trouble. Okay? So the funniest part about that is the vegan side of it. Without those bacteria that probably come from eating the animals or digesting the animals, or however the microbiota in the GI tract, the little bacteria, which is a whole world, by the way. And people are trying to do probiotics and they're trying everything or antibiotics to try to change them around. Well, you could just not eat that stuff. And your TMAO level would go down dramatically. Yeah. So for our church program, we are measuring TMAO. Can't wait to see the result, of 6 weeks or 5 weeks of vegan food. I'm hoping that it'll show a dramatic improvement. Okay, so now, so we've had
heme iron and TMAO.
Now, those are the new ones. Everyone knew about saturated fat. Okay. People argue about it, but they knew about it. And cholesterol. Right. So when you look at the Beyond or these new meats, some of them are actually made with heme iron.
I think Impossible Foods is.
And that's why it looks bloody and tastes bloody, because it's heme. Okay. Now it's a phytoheme, meaning that it comes from a fungus after
Plant-based, right?
they have a modified bacteria, if I read their methodology correctly. So I'm worried about the heme iron. Okay.
Although it does
There
come
is-
from another source. It's a plant-based heme iron. So
Right, but does it still have
Is it?
oxidized iron?
It's a question,
That's the
right?
question, right? Okay. And obviously there's no long-term outcome studies
Right.
because they're relatively new. So you have the heme iron concern. There should be no TMAO whatsoever from that, I hope.
okay. So you're still waiting to see.
There shouldn't be. There's no animal product.
Okay,
Yeah.
right? Yes,
So
agreed.
there should be.
Yes,
Okay, the next one would be the cholesterol. Absolutely none.
right?
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, yeah, there's someone actually sent a note to me saying that plants do make cholesterol. Really? And I checked his reference. He was absolutely right. It was nanograms.
Okay, I love
Nanogram,
it.
for
Yeah.
those of you not into that, that's a billionth of a gram.
Yeah, it's like
Yes.
fairy dust.
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. So
Okay.
apparently, if you make enough plant sterols, you will be by mistake make an occasional
Yeah.
actual cholesterol.
Okay.
Okay, fine. Nanograms. Okay, but for all intents and purposes, it's certainly 0 milligrams. And so you don't, but then you do have the saturated fat. And some of those products have just as much saturated fat as a Big Mac or a Whopper. And so if you're trying to avoid saturated fat, that's probably not the thing that you're looking for. The other concern that was brought up about them was the high amount of sodium. But if you're in the 600 milligrams of sodium and you don't eat any the rest of the day, you're probably okay. Our ACC guidelines for hypertension and prevention would say lower the sodium to less than 1,500 milligrams. So you could actually eat 2 of them, but nothing else the rest of the day.
So could you give me a ratio of on a daily basis, 10%, 15%
Well, that-
processed food to
That
like,
go, so first of all, so first of all, I couldn't do that.
Okay.
Because you would have to have an outcome study specifically for each processed food. For example, these veggie burgers, if they're made out of processed soy and it's, soy isolates, there's some suggestion that those are harmful to people and that there's IGF-1 and that IGF-1 would end up in cancer. Well, I don't see a lot of convincing studies, so would I do with them every now and then? Probably. You have some of these sort of vegetarian burgers or sausages actually are made with egg whites. Egg whites got a pass a few days ago, believe it or not.
what do you mean got to pass? I thought egg whites in your study were like 11% I saw the egg whites in that study that you did.
So those
Not that
were
you did,
eggs.
but-
Those were eggs.
Oh, I thought they were egg whites
They
as
were
well.
eggs,
Okay.
eggs, and so no one had that I could see had ever distinguished the eggs from the egg whites until this one study. And Don Lloyd Jones at Northwestern was one of the authors, one of the senior authors. And when I tweeted it out, he was, he walked up and patted me on the back, said, "Thank you, got that right." It had this line in it that if you do an adjustment, so first of all, background was, and this was in Lancet, anybody can look it up. There's a linear increase. Every egg you eat increases your death rate. Okay.
I like it.
And that was very clear. And the 0 line was it's 0. If you want to have a little increase in death, you eat 1. And so there was no room for error. Okay. But when they took their mathematical model and adjusted it for ingested cholesterol, there was no impact of eggs. So that was saying that the yolk is on everybody. Okay.
Right, yes, yeah.
Okay. And if you want to avoid the death that happens with eggs, just avoid the yolk. Now, would that have me go back and eat egg? I would need another study or two. I would be very concerned still about the IGF-1 with any animal protein. So I think they may have gotten a pass, but it's not free and clear yet.
And I'm going to go back and look at that talk you did to nurses that day because I know I saw something on egg whites. So I'll.
So egg. Oh yeah, it's the 11.
11.
Good memory.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well.
Okay. So that was the bottom of my protein slide.
Yes,
the
it
next
was.
to the last line.
Right, yes.
Okay. And it was talking about how people were eating egg whites for protein when quinoa
has more protein than egg whites.
Peanuts, almonds, you name it.
That's
and,
right.
And I actually modified that slide because I had at the top was, beef and pork and chicken. Well, the top is actually
Like lentils
and lentils and soybeans,
Yeah.
and so I've changed that slide around a little bit
good.
to make everybody know that it's not just adequate protein; it's actually more protein than animals, and that egg whites is one of the lowest.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of people do egg whites for protein. So, okay, so we're kind of coming round now to the very end of this interview, which I always do. The last couple of questions are meant to be one-word answers right off the top of your head. Okay, what item are we always going to find in your fridge?
Fruit.
Okay, favorite kind of fruit?
Oranges. Oh my gosh.
Ah, oranges. All right. Okay, what is your favorite snack? You're on the road, you're back and forth to many hospitals, you're super busy. What do you always have with you, junk food or not? What's your favorite snack?
Oranges.
Okay. I see a theme here. Okay, busy day, you walk in the house, what's the one meal you can always make? You can make it in 10 minutes, it's always good. Your go-to meal, it's always good.
I don't have 10 minutes.
Oh, poor thing.
So I'm so sorry to disappoint everybody. This is, cardiologist is not necessarily the lifestyle, but we're going to fix it so that it is.
Look how gracious he's been with his time today, and you don't even have 10 minutes. Oh, gosh, thank you.
So I never spend 10 minutes making a meal, and that's why those meal services are so good.
Great.
So if you're, it really does. If you don't have any kind of help at home, which I don't, I just have to just go for it and order the stuff, and it's pretty good, and
and does the trick.
Not starving anymore. Yeah.
What do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
So we want to make it 20 years.
What do you wish you knew?
My transition was in 2003. So 20 years ago, so 1998, I had seen Dean Ornish's stuff, but I wasn't taking it personally because I wasn't aware that I had risk. And, being African American, family history of hypertension, my blood pressure as a freshman medical student was 140/90. That would have been terrible.
Wow.
But, I opened up my physiology book and they said, sodium intake and blood pressure were related. Cut all the added sodium out, increased potassium, found out that those tough 3-set matches in the heat of the day when you're playing your third one, if I was taking a lot of potassium, I didn't get muscle cramps. That was number one. And number two, my blood pressure went to 125.
Wow, great.
Just with that nutritional change, sodium versus potassium. It's now in our guidelines, by the way. Okay, so then 2003 comes, I found out that I have an elevated cholesterol eating chicken and fish. That's what I wish I had known, that chicken and fish were high in cholesterol. Okay.
I love that because people think chicken and fish are the way to go.
Well, they are better than red meat, eggs, and processed red meat. No question about that. There's a lot of data. It's just a little death versus a lot of death. So what I tell people is that if somebody is going to give you a choice between lead poisoning and arsenic poisoning and cyanide poisoning, definitely take the lead.
Okay, well, those are your choices if you'd like chicken and eggs.
Exactly. And so that's what I really wish I knew, that relationship between serum cholesterol, because everybody was saying that the cholesterol that you eat doesn't make a difference. That is completely not true. And unfortunately, the month that I did this was the same month that JAMA published the portfolio diet from David Jenkins. And so what he published is exactly what happened to me. You got a dramatic drop in LDL cholesterol by going completely plant-based.
And do you have any understanding? Because I've seen studies, obviously not a doctor, so there are probably many more studies out there than just what I've seen, where it says that there's really no difference between cutting back meat and staying full board with meat. So a lot of people say, oh, I'm just going to cut meatless Mondays. I'm going to cut down my meat, and that's going to be better. And the studies that I've seen have shown that, no, you actually have to cut it out in full. Going part-time meat doesn't really help you. Is that accurate?
It isn't actually accurate, but because you have to qualify it with what is it that you're talking about. If you're talking about mortality, hypertension, diabetes, weight, Meatless Monday has an impact. It's not nearly as good as completely plant-based. But when I was talking about, let's say, the Adventist Health Study, because they have a nice little table that they've published, okay? And that was where I was saying that vegans are the only ones who are not overweight on average. Well, if you change that diet from American to semi-American diet, you actually get a 25% decrease in diabetes, 25% decrease in hypertension.
Okay, so it's a stepping stone.
And it's a stepping stone. It's exactly right. It's a stair-step effect that if you then drop the meat completely and only do fish, then you get another 20%. And then you do it again to make it ovo-lacto-vegetarian, you're down to about 40% of the baseline rate, and then you go vegan and you're down in the 20s. So it definitely is a stair-step effect. There is some benefit. You know, I hope they're not profit. I think they are, because I don't like saying companies' names, but it's called Reducitarian.
Oh yeah, the Reducitarian Foundation, they have a summit coming up in September in New York.
Yeah, I went to the one in Los Angeles, and I was saying,
last year,
why would I even go to these people who are eating animals and all this stuff? Well, they make a really good point that as human health would be improved, if you get rid of factory farming, the animals are better. You know,
environmental benefit.
But the impact on if my big concern is Medicare, okay, and not letting it go bankrupt, their approach might be the right one. Get everybody to reduce by 20%, okay? And if you could legislate that, it would be great. And those who, once you start that, but I would use it. I didn't spend that much time talking about strategy with them, obviously, but I would use that as an entry drug. Meatless Monday as an entry drug, you know, to sort of, you know, in the reverse. That is, once you realize, oh yeah, I seem to have more energy on Tuesday because I didn't eat any animals on Monday. And next thing you know, you're doing it for the weekend. Next thing you know, you're completely plant-based.
Yes. So, yeah. It's the gateway drug, as you say, the gateway drug to veganism. Is there a favorite phrase that you live by? So you've had a long day. Maybe it hasn't been a great day. You know, I'll give you an example. I always like to say, nose to the grindstone, eyes to the sky. Anything that you say to get you through?
So many of them. It really depends. You'd have to give me the situation, just because my mind tends to think in aphorisms, and I would probably say that my favorites right now are the four that I gave you. You know, about trying to convince patients to change, and you know how long they want to live, and how sick do they want to be, and those are my favorites right now. But you know, ask me again in another month, it'll get turned over to something else.
Well, I'm coming back because we want the results from that study. Cool. So my very last question for you today. Thank you for all your time. What are your predictions for the future? So that could be about health, or it could be about anything else. And that could be tomorrow, or that could be the future for 20 years. I'm guessing you're going to talk to me about the state of our health here in the United States, but what are your predictions for the future?
So anyway, can I answer the last question?
Sure.
And this one at the same time?
Sure. Isn't this the last question? Okay.
Right, but no, the one before.
Okay.
It's about my favorite. So
yes.
There are some quotes that aren't mine. And one of my favorite was actually Schopenhauer. He was a German philosopher in 1800s. And he actually said that there were three phases of truth. Okay. First, it's ridiculed.
I know where you're going with this.
Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as self-evident. And that's what I think is the answer to your last question. The future is that everybody's going to look at it and say, oh my gosh, what were we doing? Why would we consider bypass surgery something that's inevitable when we could have prevented it by changing our lifestyle?
Why did we laugh at whole grains and then just say, sure, I'll plunk down 50,000 to split open my chest?
Exactly.
Okay. I think we are in the end of stage 2, going to stage
the violent opposition is so much fun. If you don't follow me on Twitter, you should, not just because of what I'm saying, because I don't say much. I tend to my 3 words and quote a study. But the violent opposition, mostly from ketogenic people, they're really serious about I always try to show a balance, and there is some balance there. What they're pointing out is the dearth of prospective randomized trials. And they say our observational studies showing this animal kills and that animal doesn't, this plant doesn't, that all of it's flawed because doctors and nurses can't fill out food frequency questionnaires. I couldn't say that without laughing. Of course they can. But there always is going to be a question if you don't do well-designed, prospective, randomized trials with long-term outcomes. And I'm not talking about what I'm doing with biochemistry. I'm talking about heart attack, stroke, and death, hard outcomes. You have that for the Mediterranean diet. And how does that, a diet with all, Emilio Ross is one of our nutrition gurus at ACC, and Estruck and all those people who carefully designed those trials. And I know they got a lot of bad press, which they shouldn't have, about randomization problems and having to withdraw the 5-year-old publication and republish it last year. If anything, it gave them more publication, more notoriety. I think it might have even helped their cause. But how does a Mediterranean diet, the Predimed trial, become the #1 diet for 2018 when it had no mortality benefit? Nobody seems to know that it had no mortality benefit. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It was very clear. There was a graph showing the survival curves, no significant change in mortality. It didn't change heart attack. So the heart attack, stroke, and death, that 30% decrease, was mostly stroke. So fish can stop you from having, you're not going to die any less.
Oh, but you're going to live with a stroke. Enjoy that.
Well, just less. And it's still, the other, when you say a hazard ratio of 0.7, that's a 30% decrease. It sounds huge. It is good. But residual risk, you got 10 people who are going to have this stroke, 7 of them still have it. Is that what you're looking for? No. So what I'm saying is, yes, it's better than a controlled diet, but it's not the optimum diet. And so how did it get to be #1? Only one reason. They did a prospective randomized control trial with outcomes. And until we do that, and you have a study of Ornish versus Esselstyn versus Furman versus McDougall versus anyone who has a plant-based diet versus Mediterranean versus standard American, we will never have the traction for writing guidelines that we could.
Interesting. Let me see if I can summarize what you've just said. So I think you're saying that there haven't been enough randomized trials of the vegan diet for the medical community to get on board. But because there was a randomized trial of the Mediterranean diet, the medical community got on board. But what I really take from that is that marketing could be done. So for the same reason that your guidelines aren't catching on without a marketing plan, if something has a marketing plan, it catches on regardless of the information therein. I'm making gross generalizations here. I don't know. But it just seems that there was some marketing push behind that. That's why it's...
I don't know that they're other than the medical literature, I don't know that there's a specific plan to market Mediterranean. Maybe there is.
Well, it goes so much with the lifestyle people already like.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's what I see. People say Mediterranean diet, Mediterranean living, Mediterranean travels, Mediterranean vacations. It just is already so appealing to people. But people say vegan and they think like, oh, you haven't taken a shower since 1970, and right. So do you see what I'm up against?
So hippie kind of stuff.
Yes, which yes. I don't know any of those people. Do you?
My youngest son, he's in Southern California, and he calls them the hippie dippies. Yeah, so.
But he's not. He couldn't be. He's not even old enough.
No. Well, my son he's a big tough Marine. So.
Tough Marine. Is he vegan? Our big tough Marine?
No. Yeah. So
you got some work ahead of you, my friend.
Getting your kids to do your diet requires sort of.
Yes. No. It's
not easy.
It's easier to convince all of American medical.
Right, but I have to say that, I was vegetarian growing up until I got married, and then that deteriorated to chicken and fish. And so, so it really has to do with the household, and everyone in my family who is at risk, they all know what the answer is. And so it happened to my son-in-law recently.
Oh dear.
You turn and that blood pressure just goes back to normal. So it's amazing. Now, and that's what happened with me with my LDL cholesterol. Now, so wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to develop something first, a risk factor?
Right.
But at least we're measuring the risk factors.
Right.
So let's keep doing that.
Let's keep doing that. Okay, we are about to end here. I want to get the final word because we've talked about whole food plant-based diet, the benefits for you of going vegan. Final word on keto. What's the outcome there?
So I was famously quoted at King's College and doing an interview.
I didn't quote you on that because I didn't want to overquote you, and I wanted to go with patriatism. But okay, let's get out the famous quote.
It said, no one should do a ketogenic diet. Okay, that was July 1st. In September, there was a Lancet Public Health article that everyone should see that talked about ketogenic diet. but it talked about low carb increasing mortality. It also talked about high carb increasing mortality. So all these unhealthy vegans, where we had a publication in the Journal of American College of Cardiology showing that an unhealthy vegan diet that's refined flour, sugar-sweetened beverages, French fries, yeah, they're vegan, but they're horrific.
Yeah.
That heart attack rate was higher than eating animals. Okay, so this Lancet Public Health doubled down on both sides. Okay, eating that refined stuff is terrible. It wasn't as bad as the ketogenic diet, but the interesting part of that is that they had enough data from the ERIC trial to subcategorize the ketogenic diet from plants versus animals. And if you were doing a plant-based ketogenic diet, there was an 18% decrease in mortality.
But if you, what was it if you were doing all animals?
An 18% increase.
Okay.
And they put that in the context, they said they did a study and a meta-analysis where they put in the context of other studies. 18% is one of the lowest. I've seen a 12, but I've seen a 71% increase in mortality. And if you were talking about Journal of the American Heart Association, from a few years ago, people who had a heart attack in the past doing ketogenic diet with a 53% increase in mortality.
Gosh.
And so
God, 1 in 2. I mean, really?
Very serious to avoid that. And what is it? It's all the stuff we talked about.
Cholesterol, saturated fat, TMAO, and heme iron.
Ooh, my goodness, you're good at this.
I always wanted to go to medical school.
There you
Gosh,
go.
darn it.
It's not too late.
Okay, well, yes, that's my inspiration
There
for
you
this
go.
for this
All right.
interview. I want to thank you so much for all of your time. We have taken a lot of your time. You've been so very gracious with us, and I've learned so much. And I'm very grateful for all that you do and all that you do to get the word out and taking this time. Really, we want to see the studies results coming out of the African American church community in the South Side of Chicago. So I will follow up with you until I see everybody again. Thank you to you, and thanks for being vegan, everybody. Bye.
Bye.